How many loves do you get in a lifetime? How many people do you get to call yours? There are all sorts of loves in this world. Not all of them, but most of them are beautiful. Some are old, some noble, some brave. Others are dishonorable and weak, and make you so by association. Some are a low whisper on a somber night. Some are maddening. Some you can't ignore. They slow burn inside of you, never quite going out completely. But you're too scared to dare try to fan that flame. Some loves you pretend you don't feel, even when you can. Even when you know you do. Even when he's the first thing you think of in the morning. Even if he's like a match in the darkened room of your heart. Because loving something how you love him is a painful love that puts rocks in your pockets and melancholy in your eyeballs. And if time has taught you anything, it is that it doesn't matter. You'll love him forever anyway. Welcome to the House of Hastings, or my version of the House of Hastings. Today we're going to be talking about Magnolia Parks and Daisy Haites. I am giving you a little recap, and by little I mean this in total will probably be 100 hours long. I'm going to be doing them in tandem because the timeline of events for these books happens in tandem. So although they follow two different sets of characters, those characters overlap pretty substantially, and there's a lot of events that cross over. However, if this is your first exposure to Magnolia Parks, I would highly, I don't think it's really optional, recommend reading Magnolia Parks first. And then Daisy Haites. That's the reading experience as Miss Jessa Hastings, the author of these books, intended it, and I think it's the best move. So, but we're going to be doing things a little differently, going through both books at the same time. I want to talk to you a little bit about how this is going to go before we jump into things. If you have been around with me before and you've done some of my Throne of Glass recaps, these will look a little different because I felt like it would be silly if I had Magnolia just bebopping around on a slide in just a fancy brunch restaurant. It felt strange. So instead I will be using portraits and using those to help you remember which character is which, because I feel like one of the trickiest parts about getting involved in this book is there are a lot of characters, and sometimes it can be hard to figure out who is important, who did what, when, why. So we will be having those as well as some other little tidbits like locations and pieces of lore and quotes and lots of pop-ups. Don't worry, the visuals will be here. We will also be working on a timeline together as we go through the book. Okay, but I will explain that more once we actually come to it. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be starting, of course, with Magnolia and BJ. This is our main duo, particularly Magnolia. This is the Magnolia Parks Universe for a reason. Even when we are in the Daisy Haites books, Magnolia is kind of at the center of everything to some extent. This universe does truly revolve around her. And Magnolia is this British socialite heiress. She's incredibly wealthy. She works as an editor at this travel magazine, but that's mostly just a hobby. She occasionally goes on vacations and does write-ups, I would assume, and then goes out to lunch. It's mostly just something to do when she's bored, because she's just so unfathomably wealthy, in the hundreds of millions of dollars in her trust fund, sort of wealthy. She is set for life. She still lives at her family home where she grew up, and we will talk more about her house and her family later, but just to kind of establish where she's at, she's 23, I believe, when the novel begins. And then one thing that I do want to kind of point out about Magnolia and make a note of before we get started, seems to be one of her kind of major character traits is this quirk, we'll call it. Although later we learn it's connected to her OCD. It's a little bit of a compulsion, but she is able to identify the designers of any garment of clothing. And this comes up a lot in the novel. I will be popping up some outfits here and there when I find they're relevant, but just know if you were actually reading this source material, Magnolia is identifying what everyone's wearing whenever we're in her POV. Then, of course, we have Mr. BJ Ballantine, and we get this introduction to BJ through Magnolia's eyes. And so she primarily introduces BJ as the most beautiful boy in every room. And we quickly come to find out that BJ is an Instagram model by occupation, and his main hobby seems to be just sleeping through all of Great Britain. And we open with BJ and Magnolia waking up after a sleepover. And if you're not familiar with the story, you might be oh, a sleepover. They must have been up to some hanky-panky last night. No, absolutely not. These two broke up about 3 years ago, and although they spend most nights of the week together at this point, sleeping in the same bed, they are not getting up to any shenanigans. They are not kissing. They are not together very firmly. They are just best friends who happen to sleep in the same bed a lot. Okay, please don't ask questions. We find out that there's a little bit of tension there, and we find out very quickly that although they broke up 3 years ago, they are still intensely drawn to each other. We will continue to explore it. And if you're reading the text, you can't help but recognize the fact that, like, at every turn, every single one of BJ and Magnolia's thoughts centers around the other one. Like, their whole lives revolve around the other one, and how they're not together, and how they kind of want to be back together, and how they're deeply in love with each other, but, like, they ruined everything, and they just keep hurting each other, and they're hot messes, and we love them. I mean, I love them. I guess you don't have to love them. I'm not the boss of you. Here's our timeline. So it's very bare because, like I said, we're going to be filling it out together, and we are going in both directions. So although the story is told like completely chronologically, like we start now and we're going to move forward into the future, we get a ton of flashbacks and a ton of history that's uncovered as we go through the story, because all of these characters have a ton of history together. And so we will be filling out timeline in both directions as we learn more about these characters. But I just wanted to put our first couple events on the board. So we of course have this red star, which is where the book Magnolia Parks, the first one, begins. And then the one event that I put on here is the Magnolia BJ breakup, which we will unpack again and again and again as the story unfolds. But for now, it's gone here. It's 3 years in the past. This timeline, it certainly isn't to scale. But for now, this is where this is going. BJ and Magnolia head to brunch together. I did pop up an outfit for this one. Every single outfit, if you see an outfit, is from the MPU Instagram page, the MPU Closet Instagram page. I have their Instagram handle like listed on the screen. But I will also link it in the down below. She's gone through and pulled out, I think, every single outfit that Magnolia like calls out by name, or at least most of them. Like I said, I'm not going to be pulling every single outfit. I'm just pulling particularly notable outfits. I thought this one was a cute one. Cute little introduction. Wanted to introduce the idea of her outfits, but just know that that is from there. And then we, of course, have Annabelle's. Annabelle's is this real restaurant in London, and it is so cute. I was looking at pictures and I was like, oh my gosh, this place is gorgeous. A lot of the places they go, except Jonah's clubs, are like real places in London. So they're out to brunch with the full box set, and that is what they call their friend group. So of course we have Magnolia and BJ, already introduced you to them. And then we have Henry Ballantine, who is BJ's little brother. He's the same age as Magnolia, because BJ is like a year and a half older than Magnolia. We have Henry and Magnolia are actually best friends. They met each other first. Magnolia wound up meeting BJ kind of like through Henry because they're brothers. But Henry is Magnolia's like oldest and one of her closest friends. And then we have Christian Hemes. So we have the Hemes brothers. We have Christian and Jonah. Christian is Magnolia's age and Jonah is BJ's age. And they are both sons in this crime family. Especially as we get into Daisy Haites, we are deeply involved in organized crime. How fun. One of the first things we learned about Christian is that Christian dated Magnolia at one point. We don't know a lot about this. We will learn more. But we know that at some point Christian dated Magnolia, and it is caused and continues to cause kind of a lot of tension within the friend group. And then we have Jonah. So we have Christian and then we have Jonah. Jonah is BJ's best friend, and he, like I mentioned earlier, owns a bunch of clubs. They're often at Jonah's nightclubs, and I love the way he's described in this. And he's described as having sharp angles and a sharp tongue, but Magnolia clarifies, not with me because I'm his favorite. And then we have Paley Blythe. This is Magnolia's, I would say, probably like other best friend. She's Henry, and then she has this like weird, she calls it a best friendship with BJ, but like, let's be honest, that's really not what it is. She has BJ, and then she has Paley, and Paley is like the only other girl in their friend group, and they're just like close. They tend to like go to a lot of events together, those sorts of things. And then we have Perry, who I feel like the first time I read this book, I could not discern for the longest time if Perry was a man or a woman, because we're introduced to him as Perry, and I feel like Perry could go either way as far as gender, and Perry is a gay man, so he's always dating men, and I just feel like there was not a lot of like pronoun usage around him. Like we always referred to him by name, or he like wasn't involved in the scene, but he is a man who's just described as having like a really big smile. And we also learned that they all went to Varley together. So Varley is this elite boarding school where the wealthy Londoners go and spend like essentially their high school years. And because they went to Varley together, they have this particularly deep bond. They became each other's like family when they were at Varley together. So they're having a very lovely time chit-chatting away when who should stroll in but Brooks Calloway. And Brooks Calloway was Magnolia Parks' boyfriend, and they just broke up last week. And like Magnolia's not like devastated about this, because it turns out Magnolia, just like BJ has a habit of sleeping through everyone in London, Magnolia is like dating her way through London, and she just continues to like date these men. She dates them for a few weeks. Nothing ever gets too serious. They never sleep together. They like really never have any level of like emotional intimacy either, it doesn't seem. And she's essentially using them as like a shield to protect herself against BJ, to like, one, create a little jealousy in BJ, but two, BJ is like busy sleeping with everyone, and it does hurt Magnolia's feelings. And so by having these boyfriends, it just gives her a little bit of insulation. I think it also serves as fodder for the tabloids, because tabloids are obsessed with Magnolia Parks. Obviously, who wouldn't be? And if she gives them a boyfriend of the week to talk about, then they will not spend that time picking her apart. Anyway, Brooks Calloway strolls in, and Paley and BJ are trying to like distract Magnolia. In fact, they're like, have you seen the Dyson Airblade in the bathroom? Which is the worst distraction I've ever heard of. I mean, I do think this book was written like many years ago, so like Airblades were maybe newer and more exciting, but like I feel like a lot of bathrooms have Airblades, and I feel like Magnolia is like kind of gross. Also, apparently BJ has one at his house. And Magnolia's like, yeah, it's really annoying when I'm sleeping over at your house because it goes off all the time. And it's really noisy and it wakes me up in the night. Anyway, so we get a little bit about Dyson Airblades. The distraction is not that effective. She sees Brooks Calloway. She gets upset because they just broke up and he has like a new girlfriend on his arm. And she's like, how rude. And BJ, obviously, one thing we'll quickly come to learn about BJ is that if anyone upsets Magnolia, BJ will fly off the handle. If someone else, like outside of himself, upsets Magnolia, he'll try to beat them up. He loves beating people up. It's his number one hobby, I would say. And if he upsets Magnolia, he will also fly off the handle. He won't beat himself up. He will just think, what is the worst thing I could do in this moment? And he'll go do exactly that thing. So BJ's ability to make choices, especially where Magnolia is concerned, we should give him a 0 out of 10. He's failing. He's failing when it comes to Magnolia, to be honest. But Magnolia is able to diffuse the situation before BJ beats him up, and which is great. And we're able to move forward, and they go back to Magnolia's house, and this is where we will be meeting the rest of the Parks family. So back to the portrait wall, we're going to be zooming in on the Parkses. So first I want to introduce someone who is not a Park, and that is Marcelly. Marcelly is Magnolia's nanny and has been her nanny since childhood, her and her sister. And you might be like, why do they have a nanny? Aren't they in their 20s? But Marcelly became this like parental figure for Magnolia. Both of Magnolia's parents low-key suck. Sometimes high-key suck. And Marcelly was like the only one who was like a consistent like parental adult in their lives. Still confusing why she's still on the payroll. We will talk about it moving forward. Yeah, Marcelly still lives with them. And Marcelly in the book is described as like this small, like 5 foot tall, little redheaded Scottish woman. Unfortunately, that's not what I picture in my head, so unfortunately I will be unable to provide you a picture that matches that description, because in my head I pictured Dorota from Gossip Girl literally consistently, because Magnolia as a whole, like, gives Blair Waldorf, okay? The reason I finally picked up this book was because it was pitched to me as, like, a Chuck and Blair style romance between BJ and Magnolia. Now, I don't think that's entirely accurate, but I also think that if Magnolia Parks were to watch Gossip Girl, she would definitely be a Blair, not a Serena, And then we have Arrie Parks, who is Magnolia Parks' mother, and she's just like quintessentially like a wealthy woman. Like that's her occupation, is wealthy woman. She like will go to her perfume launch in a few chapters. She goes to like galas and like goes for lunches. Like she just does wealthy woman things. And like I mentioned, she is a Russian heiress, and her mother lives with them. Bushka is Magnolia's grandmother, Arie's mom, and we love her. And by we, I mean myself. She's one of my favorite characters. She is this like very stereotypical like Russian grandmother, like life of the party. She's always like hitting on BJ, and BJ loves it. They're like buddies, and she often has like vodka in her bag. And her son, so Magnolia's uncle, is always like, come back to Russia, like come live with me. I have like a beautiful house set up for you. And she's like, no. And she stays with the Parks, and is just like kind of a menace. And we love her. We love Bushka. And then we have Harley Parks. So Harley is Magnolia's dad, and like I mentioned, he's a music producer. He works with a lot of very famous musicians. In fact, Elton John is Magnolia's godfather because like they worked together. And he's like constantly writing. We get like name drops constantly from Harley. So he's also contributing to the family's wealth. And then we have Bridget. Bridget is Magnolia's younger sister, and she's like two years younger than Magnolia, and we just know that she's like a scholar. She's like still in university, she's studying psychology, and she seems to be much more focused on like academics and making something of herself that way, where Magnolia has, like Magnolia is not dumb, okay? If someone tries to tell you Magnolia Parks is dumb, they haven't read the same book as us. But Magnolia is much more interested in like fashion and like beauty, and also like the trappings of wealth. Like Magnolia is an unapologetic material girl, and Bridget really is less so. So there's the Parks family. And like I mentioned, Magnolia still lives in her childhood home in Holland Park. We just are told that it's this massive mansion in Holland Park. It's like a 10-bedroom mansion. It is absolutely stunning, gorgeous, beautiful. That night, BJ is once again having a sleepover, and we get a couple of pieces of lore dropped. And I just want to go through them because I think there's a lot of lore that we get over the course of the story from everyone. But Magnolia and BJ lore is my favorite. Like an insider piece of information is this thing that Magnolia and BJ say to each other, mostly BJ to Magnolia, where he'll go, "How's the weather?" And it is essentially him just like taking the temperature of their relationship and like her current like state. And so like obviously if things are like sunny, things are great. If they're like stormy, that's great. It's fairly self-explanatory. And then the other piece of information we get dropped in this chapter is that BJ has, I believe, like 22 or 23 tattoos at this point, and all but one of them are for Magnolia. And the one that is not for Magnolia is because BJ lost a bet with Jonah. But we will get all of the tattoos at some point. There is a point in which she lists all of BJ's tattoos, and it's maybe my favorite part in the entire novel. But we get a mention of one of his first tattoos, and that is on his thumb. He has this bow. It's the Tiffany bow necklace. I think it's actually on the back of, it's right here. It's on the back of the fourth book, Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home. It's the first present he ever got Magnolia, and he just has it tattooed on his thumb, and I think that's so cute. And then from Miss Magnolia, she gives us the story of how BJ and her met. So Magnolia and we're going to put it all on the timeline. So Magnolia and Henry met when they were pre-K. They met when they were like 3 or 4 years old. They became really close friends, and so the Ballantines and the Parks families became very close friends. They like would go on vacations together. They like would go to lunches together, those sorts of things. And so like Magnolia was kind of always around BJ from childhood. But like the first time she like really took note of him as anything more than just Henry's older brother was when they were vacationing in Capri together, and Magnolia was like 7 or 8. And she like fell off the boat. She like cut her hand and fell off the boat. And BJ jumped into the water and rescued her. He saved her. And as we will get this BJ's perspective on their early relationship later. When he recounts that story, he says that he was already in love with Magnolia at that point. Like he was already smitten with her. But it's not until they're both at Varley, when they're both at boarding school, that things start to become a little bit more serious between them. Up until that point, Magnolia is actually like deeply has a crush on Christian, but like no moves have been made in that direction. And then she gets to Varley, and remember, she's a year younger than him, so he's already been there, and he is this like rugby star. He's like, all of the girls in school are obsessed with him, and she starts to be like, oh, okay, maybe I'm into this boy. And their second year her second year at Varley, he comes up to her and he asks her out. I was standing by my locker with Paley, and he walked straight up to me, hand against the locker, cornering me like the quintessential bad boy in every teenage movie, except he wasn't a bad boy. He maybe liked to think he was, but he wasn't. He never once forgot his mom's birthday, and he'd always bring her flowers every weekend he was home from school. His all-time favorite movie is Mary Poppins, who was also his first crush. I was his second. His shoulders, even back then, were so big and broad, just the side of him whispered of badassery, except it was a ruse. When his grandfather died, he started taking his grandmother on weekly dates. He still does, actually. Let me skip ahead a little bit. And he says to her, I want to take you on a date. Oh, that's all I said. I blinked a few times. Why? He laughed once, all cool and calm. And I think if we could have all peeked behind heaven's curtain at that moment, we would have seen those old fates knotting our threads together. Me and BJ in this pure, sunny, inextricable, undoable way. I said knotted, not tied, because I don't know whether we'll ever come undone. Not easily, anyway. And so he takes her out on this date. They wind up going to like a party that they were both going to be at anyway, and they like quickly become like entirely enamored with each other, and they spend the rest of their high school days just like wrapped up in each other and like deeply and madly in love. The next day, BJ has separate plans. Maybe Magnolia's going to work. We don't know. That's not our business. But BJ is going out to brunch with the boys, and they are known by the tabloids as the billionaire boys, even though BJ is quick to point out that none of them are billionaires independently. But if you combine their net worths, they would be worth $1 billion. BJ is just kind of like reflecting back on the time that he absolutely beat the crap out of Christian when he found him and Magnolia together at this club. And he's reflecting back on it and also thinking about his relationship with the Hemmes brothers, because the thing is, although this like thing that probably would have split him, like ended any other friendship BJ had, it didn't end his friendship with the Hemmes brothers, because the Hemmes brothers are truly like brothers to the Ballantine brothers. We learn that when BJ and Jonah were 12, they came home from school and they found Jonah's and Christian's sister floating in the pool, drowned. She had passed away, and BJ was the one that helped Jonah like pull her out of the pool and like do CPR and like call an ambulance. He was there for that. And then afterwards, the Jimenez brothers actually went and stayed with the Valentines for a while their parents kind of like recovered from the situation. And so that was kind of like a bonding moment, but they like really grew up together in this way that has like really bound them together. So even though things are still like quite complicated between BJ and Christian, and I don't think BJ has ever fully forgiven Christian for dating Magnolia, he has this like sense of ownership, possession over her, and people infringing upon that, particularly someone who he's so close to as Christian, is something that I think at this point BJ thinks is like fairly unforgivable. There's also something that is like unbreakable about their friendship. We're just going to pop a few events on here. And so we get the Christian and Magnolia situation. These lines, these like stripes you'll see on the timeline are referencing various relationships. The red one is Magnolia and BJ, and then this dark blue one is Magnolia and Christian. And then I also have blue events being the events that are taking place in both timelines. Because if you'll notice, I have Magnolia events all happening on the bottom, but we are about to jump into Daisy Haites, and Daisy events will all happen on top, and they will be in green if they're like primarily affect Daisy Haites characters. Okay, gorgeous. Anyway, let's jump into the Haites books. The Daisy Haites books are fascinating because for me, they were so difficult to get into initially because I had grown to love BJ and Magnolia so much over this book that I was like, where are BJ and Magnolia? Bring them back. But actually, the Daisy books are my favorite books in the series. Julian is my favorite character. I love Daisy so much. I say that I think actually the most recent Magnolia Parks book is my favorite Magnolia Parks book in all. But in general, I love a Daisy Haites book. So let's introduce you to the Haites family. First of all, we have Julian, who's my favorite character in the whole series. He's a precious gem of a man. He is the head of this major crime family. His parents died when he turned 18 and he took over. He's the best character in this whole series, and to the point where I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that this man is the head of a crime family, because if this man told me to do crime, I would say, great, yeah, could you just make me a list and I'll take care of that for you. Like, I would do whatever he told me to do. Then we get Daisy. Daisy is his younger sister. She is 10 years younger than him, so there's a pretty substantial age gap, and he essentially raised her because, like I said, their parents died when she was 8. He was 18, and so he has kind of raised her, and it's created this like particularly close bond between the two of them. They have this sibling bond, but Julian also has like a very protective, like parental feeling towards Daisy as well. Daisy is 20. She's the same age as Bridget, I believe, and she is pre-med. She is a student. She is a scholar. She's doing the work. She is studying to become a doctor. And like in general, I would say Daisy is not like super into the whole crime thing. She like really would love to have a totally normal life, but also knows it's off the table. Like has been raised in this family and knows like this is kind of what she's stuck with. And then we also get introduced to the crew. So these guys are called the Lost Boys. We will see some of them more than others over the course of this novel, and they are like the men that are like the closest to Julian, and so they're always over at the house. So Daisy really was raised not only by Julian but by these men as well. She was raised by like this village of men. Essentially, she had very few female figures in her life. Alexei Kikoa, who is like Julian's like right-hand man. He is in charge of Julian's security to some extent, and also like helps him with like decision making. And Julian have found him card counting in Vegas, which we love. And then we have Declan and TK, and those guys are the closest, and they're also the youngest. I think they're in their like early to mid 20s, and they are newer. Julian brought them on when he took over. And then we have Miguel, who is Daisy's bodyguard and my favorite, maybe my second favorite character in the series. He's a gem. And he just like makes sure Daisy's safe. He's always pretty much with Daisy. And then we have Smoke Show and Happy. And Smoke Show and Happy are two of the older, like the old guard. So they both worked under Julian's father, but they have continued to work for Julian. They have real names too, but we call them Smoke Show and Happy. And then we're introduced to Daisy's central rule, which is no guns at the dinner table. I think the reason for this is like multifold. Daisy, one, loves cooking. It's like one of her favorite things. I think largely because Daisy is not allowed out of the house in a normal capacity. Like she leaves the house, don't even worry. But because she is at like a pretty high risk of someone trying to murder her. She's not allowed out of the house willy-nilly, and so I think she had to develop a lot of hobbies within the home, and cooking quickly became one of those hobbies. It's also something that connects her again to this desire for a normal life. And so in order to kind of guard the sanctity of that, I think to some extent, Daisy requires them not to keep their guns at the dinner table, to try to create some level of separation between like this normal life that she's trying to foster and like the crime that everyone is committing outside of the house and often inside the house. We're also introduced to the idea of the Haites residence, which is called the compound. It is this massive complex in Knightsbridge, in which I think Julian's father wound up buying like a bunch of houses in Knightsbridge and turning them all into one giant compound. Hence the name, the compound. It's like huge. We'll get more lore about the compound as we go. They're eating dinner when all of a sudden Declan brings TK into the house. TK has been shot and they need Daisy to stitch him up because they don't do hospitals. That's like a big tenet because they don't want to leave a paper trail. So they don't do traditional hospitals. It's one of the reasons Daisy went into pre-med, this ability to actually like fundamentally help her family in this way. And so she winds up stitching up the boys like quite often. And so she's stitching up this guy. She gets a little annoyed because she gets blood on her brand new t-shirt, and who should show up but Christian Hemez. So Christian, we come to find out, Christian from Magnolia and BJ's book as well. Christian has been sleeping with Daisy for a few months now. It was supposed to be very, very, very casual, but Daisy is starting to develop feelings. And that night they're laying in bed and Daisy talks about how her like biggest dream and her biggest wish in life is that she like could get a driver's license and drive around without a bodyguard. Okay. And we just like once again are like told and shown that Daisy just like really just wants to be a normal girl. She's got a little bit of Little Mermaid complex. Oh, I should address this. I also want to address what Daisy looks like, because Daisy in my portrait, I don't know which side she'll be on. Daisy in my portrait does not look like Daisy from the book. And I know that. I am well aware that Daisy does not look like Daisy should look. But here's the thing. Jessa has said that she thinks that she messed up and she should have made Daisy a blonde. Okay. I already felt justified in my ability to change her a little bit because I've always pictured Daisy as a strawberry blonde. I think it's because I started reading these books around the same time the Daisy Jones and the Six TV show was coming out, and she is like a redhead, but like I have always pictured Daisy as a strawberry blonde, and so I will be presenting her to the class as a strawberry blonde. We follow Mr. Julian as he goes out to brunch with Carmelo and Jonah. These are his best friends. So the Hemez brothers, Jonah and Christian, like I said, are part of a crime family. And so Julian is best friends with Jonah as well. So Jonah has two best friends, Julian and BJ. The Hemezes are connected to the Haites in that they're both crime families that operate in a similar region. Julian is like the head guy. He's like, his crime family is the boss crime family. I don't know. I don't understand the politics, to be 100% honest, and you don't need to, but like he's the boss man, and so he's in charge of everybody. He's also in charge where Jonah and Christian are still like not the heads of the crime family. They like are doing work, you know, they still are doing some light crime, but their mom and I think their uncle are still like running things mostly because they're still alive. Carmelo is also from another crime family, the Brambrillos, and we will spend a lot of time with the Brambrillos. The Brambrillos and the Haites are probably like the families that are like the closest of the two crime families, and we learn pretty rapidly, we just get a mention that Daisy and Carmelo's little brother Romeo at one point did date. Don't worry, we will unpack that later. And Julian is just thinking to himself how much he like loves the Hemezes, but he's upset that Daisy and Christian are together, because it puts another target on Daisy's back. Daisy is already like highly targeted because everyone knows that if you want to get to Julian, you just need to get Daisy. Like Daisy is his like soft place, his like place of like 100% vulnerability. And he knows that puts a tremendous target on her. And he knows that her sleeping with Christian puts an even bigger target on her because now it's like a 2-for-1 deal. You get Daisy, you have Julian, and you have Christian under your thumb. And so he's a little concerned about that. And it's not great. We also know that there's some vague threat happening in the background because he makes an offhanded comment about doubling Daisy's security because like something is going down at brunch, and they wind up chatting, and I think Julian brings it up and he's like, oh my gosh, I thought I saw that BJ and Magnolia were back together, and Jonah's like, no, don't even worry, like once they get back together, BJ will throw a parade, you will know when he's back with that girl. And Julian is like, oh, I might take a crack at her, and Jonah is like, LOL. This is in fact what happens. This Besides, Magnolia Parks, she's just one of those girls. Got everyone in her pockets, and you can live in it pretty happily. I do anyway. She's got all those boys wrapped around her finger, and Joe's easy to rile up when it comes to her. It's low-hanging fruit, but I'm here for it. I'm gonna take a crack, I tell him, sitting up straighter. And at that, Jonah cracks up. Good old belly laugh. That smarmy shit pinched my eyes, annoyed. Sorry, man, Jill laughs, genuinely amused. But she would never. I sniff a laugh. Weighed up in my mind whether I'll tell him something that'll blow his fucking mind. Decide to keep it in my back pocket for another day. It was a few years back now. A statute of limitations and shit. Besides, I reckon it says more about me than it does about her anyway. That we were on the path for a fucking spectacular night, and she started crying over her ex-boyfriend. So we had pancakes in my bed and watched Nick at Night. Fucking bad for business. Can't have it. I'd rather not have the clout of it than risk anyone hearing that I might actually have a heart. So we get this little tidbit that at one point Magnolia and Julian had a little night together. Interesting. I'm sure that will never ever come up. Again, it's so unimportant that I'm not going to put it on the timeline. Just kidding. I did put it on the timeline. I also went ahead and put Christian and Daisy on the timeline, and they have a little arrow because they are still actively dating. Okay, back to Miss Daisy, and we get a little bit of Daisy lore, a little bit of information about Daisy. And Daisy loves laundry. Daisy loves doing laundry. It's just one thing about her. So she loves cooking, she loves doing laundry. And again, it's because she's been forced into this position where she does not get to leave the house. And also this position in which she's striving for any morsels of normalcy. But also there's this deep connection of laundry to her childhood, because when she was a kid, if anything that Julian didn't want her overhearing was happening in the house, he would put her in the laundry room, close the door, turn the dryer on, and put coins in it. So it was incredibly noisy, just to make noise and drown out anything scary that might be happening. So she's kind of grown to associate the laundry room with safety. She knows nothing bad will happen to her in the laundry room. And I also think there's this level of metaphor. I'm going to read you a little passage from the section where she's talking about laundry, in which Daisy really loves being able to do restore things to their previous state, to pull stains out. It is this metaphor for innocence, and it's a similar reason why she went into medicine. This idea that if Julian is doing harm in the world, that she can do she can walk behind him and clean up after him to some extent. One of my favorite things about Daisy is she's a thinker in terms of she loves really thoroughly thinking about stuff. She particularly loves a theological metaphor, and I love a theological metaphor too. I'm going to read you a bit from this. Do you know what original sin is? It's this theological concept that we were all born innately sinful, and my brother loves it. Says it's one of his 2 get out of jail free cards. That we are all already born sinful, so he's just living up to his nature. But I don't like it. I don't like the idea that we're born bad, because if we're all born sinners, I don't know if we can ever really wash ourselves clean. Do you believe children carry the sins of their father? Have you heard of that? Generational sins, ancestral sins. Do you believe in those? My brother does. Because our dad did what he did. That's Julian's second pass. He's already wearing dad's sins. What's a few more? He says it's just the family business, but I call it the family sin. He doesn't like when I say that, but I think he thinks I'm right. He just doesn't know what to do about it. Neither of us do. We are who we are, and what we are is all we've ever known. We have rules I made up when I was little that we don't break. Things that Julian promised he'd never do that make everything we do seem a little less bad. People we won't work with no matter what. Samta Assad, Mata Tassel, Rosen McMahon. People who fuck with people how they fuck with people. It's a no-fly zone for us. Julian would never. I need him to never. Okay, so we, get a little bit of a glimpse into the responsibility that Daisy also feels over Julian. So Julian feels an intense responsibility over Daisy and making sure she's safe. And I think Daisy feels a responsibility over Julian in keeping him moral. She knows that it's very easy in these sorts of situations to let power get the better of you. And Daisy feels a level of responsibility to keep Julian on the right track. Anyway, these 3 down here, I have their photos on the wall so you can take a look at them. These are the people they will no longer, they don't work with, because they're bad people who do bad things. It's a line in the sand. I'm sure this will never come up again. Then we switch over to old Christian's perspective. Christian gets a perspective in this book because he's Daisy's love interest. Christian is maybe my least favorite character. Regardless, we're getting a chapter in Christian's perspective, and Christian is at home with Henry when who should show up at Magnolia and Paley. They come over, and they're clearly, Magnolia particularly, is clearly looking for BJ. Because Magnolia is always looking for BJ. And she's clearly disappointed that he is not home. Also, not only because she wanted to see him and hang out with him, but also because if he's not home, that means he's probably out on the town with some girly. And so since he's not home, Magnolia immediately starts to get like really clingy with Christian, because that's what she does. Magnolia Parks cannot function if everyone around her is not like obsessed with her and she's not the center of the universe. Because I don't think we see her clearly in the Magnolia Parks books, because the two perspectives we get in there are Magnolia, and Magnolia cannot see herself clearly, as like I don't think most of us can see ourselves clearly, and BJ. And BJ thinks Magnolia hung the sun, moon, and stars. He also like oftentimes hates her, but like mostly thinks she's literally the best thing in the absolute entire universe. But Christian has this like very complicated relationship with Magnolia, in which at one point they were together. Now they're not. And he can kind of see some of her behaviors a little bit more clearly. And as we kind of see Magnolia through Daisy and Julian's eyes as well, they also have very different perspectives on Magnolia. And I think we get to see this like very full picture of who Magnolia is. And Magnolia is complicated and often not good. She is often the villain in everyone's story. Not on purpose. I still love her, but like she's a complicated girl. Anyway, Daisy is texting Christian and Christian just like completely blows her off, ignores her, because Magnolia is over. If Christian Hemmes has no haters, I unfortunately have passed away. Like, I unfortunately have passed away. I'm such a big Christian hater, because I feel like Daisy is the coolest girl in this book. She's the coolest girl. She's smart, she's rich, she's pretty, she's talented. She's someone, her brother is super cool. She might get you murdered, but like that's something you have to risk. And I just feel like she deserves better. I do feel that she deserves better. And I am such a Christian hater. I assume, we don't know because the Daisy Haites saga has not actually completed yet. I assume Daisy is going to end up with Christian. Like, I assume that they're endgame because he has a POV section in all of her books. But like, I think she could do better. I do think she could do better. Anyway, Magnolia winds up spending the night. She sleeps in Henry's bed, but in the morning ends up like wandering in with Christian and is like chatting with Christian. But the moment BJ Valentine walks through that door, Magnolia's done. She drops him like a hot potato, because like she has no interest in Christian. She only is interested in BJ. And I wish Christian could get that through his thick little skull, but he can't. Then the next scene we get is Magnolia's perspective on her mom's perfume launch. Like I said, like Arrie Parks is just like a rich lady doing rich lady things, and like much like Paris Hilton, she said, I'm gonna have a perfume. And they host it in the lecture room and library at Sketch, and it's very, very cute. Again, look up pictures. But and I also pulled outfits because Magnolia is looking beautiful in a like beaded green Marchesa gown, so I pulled the outfit for that one. Everyone who's anyone is here. I didn't put pictures of like literally everyone, but like anyone from Magnolia's side of the portrait wall is probably at the perfume launch. But our major players are Miss Magnolia, who shows up with Paley, and she's hanging out with Paley when all of a sudden Harley comes over. Harley being her father, and Harley's like, hey girlie, where should I like need to take some of my artists on a writing retreat. Do you have any thoughts on where we should go? And this is like a really big deal because Harley and Magnolia have like a quite strained relationship, and oftentimes like Harley seems to like really discount Magnolia, and so to come for her for this like travel recommendation, this what she does for a job, I think Magnolia takes this as like very seriously, and she's like, yeah, of course. And she gives him a recommendation for this place called Farmhand that's out in the country. She hasn't been there yet, but she's heard really wonderful things. Then she also meets Augustus Waterhouse. Gus is this character who will just continue to pop up, and the first time I read it, I like forgot who he was a lot. But Gus is this British pop star. He's up and coming. He's working with Harley, and so he shows up in connection with Harley, but he's also best friends with this guy named Tom England. And Tom England we will come to unpack more later, but Tom England is this like very famous, very wealthy bachelor who is like the most eligible bachelor in all of London, and Augustus Waterhouse is his best friend. Then BJ finally shows up. He is very late, and who's on his arm but Tara Sachs, and this like infuriates Magnolia because Magnolia hates Tara Sachs. Because BJ, we've come to find out slowly that the reason that Magnolia and BJ ended was some sort of cheating incident. And Magnolia doesn't know the whole picture. She doesn't know who BJ cheated with, just that he cheated. And she is sure that he cheated with Tara Sachs. And so she doesn't love Tara for that reason, understandably. And so when BJ shows up with Tara, she's really upset, and she's talking with BJ, and she realizes that he like recently showered, and she knows that because he recently showered, that means that him and Tara probably like really just recently like slept together, and it's like her mom's perfume launch, and she showed he showed up with like her worst enemy. And so in response, Magnolia does the only rational thing you can do, which is get like super, super wasted. And so she gets very, very drunk at her mother's perfume launch. Oh, I forgot to also mention that this chapter opens with Magnolia like listing scents, because like perfume, and she like lists who she associates like each scent with. And then she talks about orange blossom, and she talks about how orange blossom is the scent of the worst, or one of the worst nights in her life. The next morning, BJ comes over and apologizes with the Chanel bag. This is just what he does. I was listening to someone else talk about Magnolia Parks, and they said one of the reasons they loved it so much is because BJ is often apologizing with like bags and garments. And they love the fact that like BJ not only is like getting Magnolia presents, but like consistently getting presents that she would want. Like Magnolia is never like, ew, you got me the wrong bag. Like he pays attention to her and like knows what she is like looking for, what she wants, but hasn't gotten herself yet. Anyway, it's this absolutely stunning pink Chanel bag that has like resin little like beads in the strap. It is so cute. I hadn't actually seen a picture of it until I was pulling pictures for this video, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is literally so beautiful. I would have forgiven him too. Then we jump back over to Julian and Julian's perspective, and we are in Julian's office, and Julian's office has a big giant stolen Van Gogh hanging on the wall. And Julian's just like looking at it, and Daisy and her best friend Jack Giles are over, and they're just like chitting and chatting and hanging out when all of a sudden the doorbell rings, and they're like, who could it be? It's 9 o'clock at night. And Daisy goes over to the door, and it's Killian Tiller. This is where I have to confess to you that I'm not a Christian girl. I'm a Tiller girl. It's embarrassing for me. It's a little embarrassing for me that the cop is my favorite. Okay? It is. But what can I do? So we meet Tiller. Tiller is from like the East Coast somewhere, like Rhode Island, Connecticut, in America, but he works in the British police force, and he is like in charge of like Julian's investigation. And like it seems like largely his plan for this investigation is just to like continually like knock on the Haites' door and be like, hello, have you done any crime recently? And then they go, no, we haven't. And he says, I don't believe you, I'll be back again tomorrow. That like mostly seems like what he does. He doesn't seem particularly effective at his job, but you know, he's trying his best, we think. Anyway, he comes over, and Daisy answers the door because Daisy really enjoys talking with Tiller. It's like a fun time for her. They like flirt. It's cute. But he's a girlfriend, so things don't get like too flirty, because like he does have a girlfriend for now. Then we get this little throwback. Daisy is thinking back to her birthday, and I guess when her birthday happened, her and Christian had only been dating for like a couple months, like maybe 2 months, and she didn't mention it to him. Like they weren't anything serious enough where like her birthday would be something that he was like super concerned with, she thought. But Christian actually took it upon himself to, for her birthday, take her out to the country and like arrange it with Miguel, her security, to take her on driving lessons, and he let her drive, and like it was like a big deal because again, she just wants normalcy. That's all she wants. Is that too much to ask? Yes, in fact it is too much to ask. Then we're back at the compound, we're hanging out, Daisy's probably cooking a meal, when all of a sudden, Carmelo and Romeo Brambillo walk into the door. Romeo is hauling his brother in because guess who got shot? Daisy's got to do some stitches. But it's also the first time that we've seen Romeo, because Romeo has spent the last year, or maybe 2 years, in New York. Romeo got kicked abroad to finish up his schooling and to like, I don't know, do stuff in New York. This is the first time Daisy has seen him since he has been back. And we know that Daisy and Romeo were like childhood loves. They like grew up together and like dated for like a long time. But something happened a couple years ago. They don't date anymore. We get his return actually from Julian's perspective first. Okay, this is what Julian's thinking. I feel bad for her for a second, for all the shit they've been through, all the ways I've kept them apart. But then that night rattles around in my head. That feeling disappears on the spot. I did the right thing. Kept her alive, that's the gig. Happiness is irrelevant. You can't cater to happy. Ask any parent. It's ephemeral. Keep her safe. That's the important part. And so we get the sense that like Julian had some role in their breakup, that he orchestrated it to some extent. Although we will very quickly uncover that although he may have orchestrated like their official breakup, the thing that actually like ended them in Daisy's eyes, to that Romeo slept with Tabby Jukes in her bed. They were like mostly broken up, but like not really broken up. And Daisy caught Romeo with Tabby Jukes in her bed. And she said, oh, that is a hard stop, hard no for me. And then we get this from Daisy's perspective, her thoughts on Romeo. The long version is Romeo, is my family. I grew up with him. I fell in love with him when I was, I don't know, all of 8 years old. He's my oldest friend. He's my best friend. We've been more shit than I wish we had, but I don't want to talk about it. We ended properly probably 3 years ago, but define properly. There's too much water under the bridge for properly. There's no properly. He and I will only break up properly when one of us is dead. No one likes it when I say that, though. Least of all, him. And so things are really complicated between the two of them, and I really love Romeo and Daisy's relationship because it is such a similar but contrasting relationship to BJ and Magnolia, who these four, I guess, BJ and Magnolia and Romeo and Daisy all had these like very epic like childhood loves where they loved each other for years growing up, and they like grew up together, and they're both broken up with these boys. And Magnolia, from page one, we get the sense that her whole life is revolving around like when she will get back together with BJ. There feels like there's inevitability in their return back together, and I think the opposite is true for Daisy. It feels almost impossible that they would end up back together, that this was like a crucial moment in her life, but the door is kind of closed on that. And although she has like this nostalgic sort of connection to their romance and will always have like a relationship with Romeo, it doesn't feel like, oh, they're gonna inevitably tumble back into each other, if that makes sense. And I really like the contrast, the ways in which, and we will continue to see this contrast play out, and the ways in which Daisy and Romeo's relationship is contrasted with BJ and Magnolia's. To the timeline, we're adding a few more events to the timeline. Obviously, we've got to add Rome and Daisy to the relationship, and they're this purple line up on top. And they've also added that Romeo's back because I feel like this is a crucial moment in the current timeline. Back in Magnolia BJ Land, we actually get a chapter that's almost entirely a flashback from Magnolia's perspective. So we open chapter 7 with Magnolia talking directly to the reader. And this is actually something that Magnolia does quite a bit. She says, "You're wondering, I know you are, everyone does, why aren't we together? Infidelity aside, you think he's perfect, that we're perfect, that nothing in this world, past, present, or future, could be big enough or bad enough to justify us not being together. I get it. I've been there. I thought that too." And she goes on to unpack one of the worst nights in her life. And it's a night in which BJ overdosed. And this night happened pretty shortly after Christian and her ended, and it essentially happened in response to Magnolia was like out at a club with another guy and was like having a nice time, and BJ saw that, and then the next day she's out with the boys and he calls her, and she immediately knows something is wrong, like immediately clocks that like he's slurring her words, he's like stumbling over them, and they're able to get out from him, and there's a girl with him as well where he is, and they're able to get up to the hotel room, and Jonah and Christian like get him in the shower, and they're calling an ambulance. Well, Henry is like holding Magnolia because BJ is essentially like dying in front of her. She like truly believes that he like very well could die, and like he could. He's like seizing in the shower, he's throwing up, like he is not doing well. I'm gonna read you what she's thinking to herself. "I remember wondering if this was it, if this was the last time I'd ever see him with the starry eyes and the hair I loved to knot my hands up in. The most beautiful boy in every room, the great love of my life. How many loves do you get in a lifetime? I remember wondering that. How many people will look at me like he does? Not just like I'm the sun, but like I'm the whole goddamn universe. I remember hating him for doing this to us. I remember hating him for dying before we had a chance to be okay again. Because I always thought we would be. I thought we'd be fine. I thought one day we'd sort our shit out and I'd forgive him for everything he's done, and we'd grow old together and we'd finally get that house up in Tobermory. But then he was dying of a coke overdose because I looked happy the night before with another man I don't give a fucking shit about. I remember resentment pounding through my body, and then I remember it, like a physical punch to the gut, how much I loved him. Really loved him. To the bone, loved him. Cut me and I'd bleed him. How much I needed him. Still need him. Would forever and always, never couldn't, even if I tried, need him. And I remember being deeply afraid of what my life would look like without him in it." This moment is like a very important moment of reckoning for Magnolia, in which she realizes and like has to grapple with the sense of like mortality, and that like maybe everything won't work out. I think up until this point she kind of just like thought they were on a little hiatus, like something happened and she's like almost like punishing him for it. He's like in the timeout chair in the corner, and this realization that like life is going to move forward whether they're together or not, and like things are going to happen to them, and like horrific things, life ending, life altering things will happen to them. And after this, after he overdoses, they're able to get him to the hospital, and Magnolia stays with him. When he comes to, she like makes sure he's gonna be fine. The doctor is like, yeah, he's gonna be fine, he's gonna make a full recovery. And then she slaps him in the face and she says to him, "If you ever do that to me again, I will never forgive you." And she's like serious. She means business. And this event like really changes both of them, because I think it is just like this recognition of their mortality, this recognition that like things could be over in a blink, and they are not in charge of when or how or if that happens. And then at the end of the chapter, she answers that question she posed at the beginning of like, why aren't they still together? Because loving him is the same thing as tossing the keys to my heart to a valet without a driver's license. He'll drive me straight off a cliff. This idea that like he is too reckless with her, that he is like her weak spot, like does not trust him enough to give him that power over her. Even though like honestly, already he has like so much of it. I also wanted to briefly mention Tobermory, because it is one of my favorite little pieces of lore that we get in this chapter, and it is this absolutely adorable. I like just knew it was a town in the countryside in the book, but like it's not just a town in the countryside. It is this like beautiful, like cute little Scottish town. I believe it's on an island like way up north in Scotland, and it's the place that they like reference a lot as their like place that they would escape to. Like BJ and Magnolia like have this version of their life in which they're not in like this pressure tank of like London high society where there are always cameras all on them and there's all these like responsibilities they have, where they can just go like live a quiet life away from everything. And Tobermory is like the kind of location for this like daydream of like soft quiet life they can have together. I did go ahead and pop BJ's overdose onto the timeline because I do think it's an event that really like fundamentally shifts the way that BJ and Magnolia see each other. We have like the breakup, and that's like a pretty like substantial division, but then we also have this, which seems like a pretty substantial turning point. And actually after this, there's a little bit where Magnolia thinks that they might get back together. She's like, you know what, like if he were to die before we got back together, I don't know if I could live with myself. Like maybe this one night isn't worth me completely shutting him out. But Marcelly is the one that is like, no, like if he cheated once, he's gonna cheat with you again. Like you cannot trust him. And so she like doesn't. She like continues the way they have been. And then we're back. We're back with the Haites. And we are out with Christian. We're in Christian's perspective. He's out in one of Jonah's clubs. He's with Henry, and him and Henry are like chatting, and Henry is trying to get the tea on Daisy. He's trying to like figure out what the deal is between Christian and Daisy, because it feels different. Like Christian goes through a lot of girls, not quite as many as BJ because no one could beat that record, but he goes through a lot of girls. But like Daisy seems different, and Christian like will not talk about her, like will not be like he's like no, nothing's going on. Like what are you saying? And Henry's like, clearly something's going on, and he's like, you are crazy, nothing's happening. He's also largely thinking about Magnolia. Like, mostly his attention is fixated on Magnolia. Christian's not Henry's. Because he's the worst. Yuck. And then Daisy winds up showing up, and Christian is busy all night. Like, he's doing other stuff. And he leaves Daisy with Henry, and, like, she spends some time with Henry, but then she winds up going to the bar, and she winds up spending most of the night with this, like, hot Australian bartender, and just, like, chatting with him. No, nothing crazy, just like a fun, cute little time. Christian gets a little jealous of that, but like doesn't say anything. And then he goes to Miguel at the end of the night, Miguel, Daisy's security, and he's like, hey Miguel, is it okay if Daisy doesn't go back to the compound today? If like security wise, does she need to go back to the compound, or can she go out? And Miguel says, oh, depends on who's asking. Is it you or the bartender? And Christian's like, don't be dumb. Like obviously it's me. And Miguel's like, that's so weird because she definitely spent more time with the bartender tonight than with you. She like came out to see you and you barely had any time for her. So, and this is why Miguel is a gem, because Miguel is like, this is not appropriate behavior. This is not how you treat my girl Daisy. And that's right. That's right. This is not how you treat my girl Daisy. But anyway, Miguel's like, yes. And then we find out that whenever Daisy spends the night at Christian's house, Miguel sleeps outside in his car to like babysit her essentially. And Christian's like, you know, like she's sleeping, like we have security too. Like I'm also in a crime family. And Miguel is like, doesn't matter. Like I will protect her, keep her safe. So Daisy and Christian go home together as they're like laying on the couch, I think. They're laying together after they've just slept together. And Christian was like, oh my gosh, you have a freckle right on your lip. Like I've never noticed it before. And Daisy's like, we've been sleeping together for months and this is the first time you've noticed this freckle. And Christian's like, what? Like, you know all of my freckles? And Daisy closes her eyes and she can pick out all of Christian's freckles. She like points to his face and she points to exactly where every single freckle on his face is. But at the same time, she still knows that he's still hung up on Magnolia. And this is what she thinks to herself. I shove away his hand from my eyes and look up at him, and he's staring down at me, brows low, face serious, all ripe with the kind of confusion one might have when you realize someone likes you more than you like them. And I feel shamefully see-through, like I just gave all of me away. And he's all surprised that I know his face, but what he doesn't know is that how he looks in the morning time is burned into my memory. And one day, when all of this is over, and we're not hooking up anymore, and he's with someone else, and I figured out how to move on and past him, and we're not together anymore because I don't think he has room in my heart to see me like that, when all he can see is her. Even if sometimes now it feels like maybe he could. Even then, I will see his face when I close my eyes. Say it with me, everyone. Daisy Haites deserves better. Christian! Oh my gosh, she's such a gem. And he's like, anyway, I wish I could have Magnolia again. Disgusting. Get out of here. Meanwhile, we zoom back over to my bestie bro, Julian. And Julian, like I mentioned, is, you know, in charge of a lot of things. He has, in the crime world, he has his fingers in a lot of pies. His like primary and legal occupation is as an arms dealer, but his like true passion lies in art thievery. He loves stealing some art. And he has like arranged a meeting with this guy who wants to hire them to steal something for him. Kikoa is like, the vibes are weird, and he makes Julian bring like a lot of people. They're going to one of Jonah's clubs because like security is fairly decent there, but like he has to bring like a lot of guys with him as well because the vibes are off. So he's meeting this guy named Ezra Brown, and Ezra Brown is older than Julian was anticipating. He's like in his 40s, but he's like completely decked out in Fendi in a way that feels like much younger and just like doesn't vibe. The level of money that you need to steal paintings at this level and like, you know, procure stolen art as like a hobby is just like not necessarily like a new money, I have a couple $1,000,000 sort of activity. Like, you need more than that. And the vibes are just weird. But anyway, he's at this meeting, he's talking with this guy, and he's like, okay, Ezra, what do you want me to steal? And Ezra says, oh, I want you to steal Klimt's Adam and Eve. And Julian's like, for sure, for sure. Do you want me to just pop by and grab the Mona Lisa for you too while I'm at it? And it's just like a weird request. Julian is like a little weirded out with this request because once a painting is like famous enough, it becomes like pointless to steal to some extent because you can't display it. Because every single person who would come into your house would know it's stolen. You can't sell it because who are you going to sell it to? It's like very clearly marked as stolen. And so like, what's the point of owning it? And we're kind of at that level sort of with this painting. But Julian is like, this feels weird. And so he quotes Ezra this outrageous price. Like, it's not cheap to hire Julian on like a good day. And he quotes like an outrageous price. And Ezra does not blink and is like, perfect, that sounds great. Thank you. And Julian's like, okay, well, we're not agreeing to it yet. Like, I need to like kind of do some work to figure out like how much it'll cost for me to go in and steal this painting and like decide whether it's worth it for me. So I will get back to you. And Ezra's like, okay, great. But like, I'm willing to pay whatever to get this painting. Again, suspicious. Then we zoom into Christian and Daisy. They are, post their encounter last night, are now getting breakfast together. They go over to this cafe that's over by Christian's house, and Daisy gets an item, and it seems to not be what she wants. And Christian's like, why don't you get the thing that you got last time? You loved that. And Daisy says, oh, I never ordered the same food on a menu twice. It like makes it much harder to poison me. And Christian's like, that seems like overkill. But like, security for Daisy is like a full-time occupation. Like, she's always thinking about, you know, what security needs to look like to keep herself safe. Anyway, Christian is like kind of thinking about Daisy and how he's like sort of starting to fall for her, but he like won't say anything to her because like if they take it to the next level, it like slams the door on Magnolia, and he wants to leave that door cracked for as long as possible because he's a little bit of a dickhead. He is, and so he's going to string along Daisy in order to prevent himself from closing off the possibility, which is essentially non-existent, of him and Magnolia hooking up again. Tiller also shows up to this coffee shop and flirts with Daisy. I like truly just think he like follows Daisy around. Like, get a job. And then later that day, Daisy's at class because she's a scholar. She's going to go to school. She's going to do work. And who should show up but Romeo? And Romeo's like, hey, can I take you out to lunch? And Daisy's like, I have class all day. Like, no. And he's like, I will come here. I will meet you here. I will meet you for lunch. I just want to like catch up. I've been gone for years and like we were best friends. So like, I think you owe me lunch. And Daisy's like, okay, if you come here, I will meet you for lunch. And they have lunch together. And we learn very quickly that Romeo only slept with Tabby because he saw Daisy hooking up with Booker. But Daisy's like, oh, I didn't like sleep with Booker. I just was like making out with him in the hallway. And Romeo's like, oh my gosh, I wish you would have said something. Daisy's like, I like totally, that was a misunderstanding. I did think you were sleeping with Booker. And that is my bad. Sorry, girly pop. Anyway, now that I'm back in town, are you gonna break up with Christian? We like did that whole song and dance and now we can like get back together again. And Daisy's like, no, I'm not gonna break up with Christian. You slept with Tabby Jukes in my bed. So no, we were like done. And Romeo is a little perplexed by this because like he kind of did think that he was going to come back and then him and Daisy were just going to pick up right where they left off, but unfortunately for him, that's not going to happen. And that night, the Haites, or maybe later that week, I don't know, the Haites go over to the Brambillos for dinner. Like I mentioned, the Haites family and the Brambillo families are like incredibly close together. They like do holidays together, they do frequent dinners, and the mother of the Brambillo family, Delina, became kind of like a mother figure for Daisy, and Julian really tried to foster this because he knew that Daisy didn't have very many like female role models, female people in her life, and so he tried to make sure that at least she had Delina, and Daisy and Delina are fairly close still. Next, we get one of the true joys of the tandem read, and that is a crossover scene that we get in both Magnolia and Daisy's perspective, the true crossover. So, they are at the Holland Park Cafe. Daisy and Christian are there when Magnolia and Bridget walk through the doors, and they immediately spot Christian and Daisy, and Magnolia is like shocked. And so she walks over to the table immediately and is like, oh my gosh, hello girly. This is how she describes Daisy when she first sees her. She says, Daisy hates, as in Julian, because remember, Magnolia and Julian have this like relationship, this like friendship that no one really knows about. We love. Yes, that Julian, the gang lord who somehow manages to appear in GQ and write-ups in Vice. Jonah's other closest friend, I'd say. Daisy's his sister. She's a few years younger than me. Completely beautiful. A sort of terrifying dark brown hair, bright hazel eyes, and skin a little more tan than your standard issue white girl. Not my Daisy. My Daisy is a pale redhead. She is sharp and fast and could be carrying a gun, so I'm always very friendly. And so we get this like impression of, we get this like first impression, and Magnolia is like trying to make small talk and like be polite with Daisy. She's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you guys were together. And she's like chatting with Daisy, and she finds out Daisy's a student still, and she's like, oh my gosh, Daisy, what are you studying? And Daisy tells her like in short one-word answers. She's like pre-med, and Magnolia is like, oh, what's your favorite class? And Daisy goes, mortuary studies, and just gets up and leaves. And Magnolia is like, oh my gosh, she is not very friendly. She's being like kind of rude. And later she actually like texts Christian about it. She says, that was weird. Christian says back to her, she's just not that friendly. And Magnolia says, there are prison guards in Guantanamo Bay that are more personable than her. And then she asks Christian if they're actually dating, and Christian says, no. And Magnolia says, but you like her. And he says, not like that. Anyway, if he like fell into a volcano, I wouldn't be sad. Anyway, then we get the same scene from Daisy's perspective, and we realize why she's so rude is because she knows that the reason that Christian, or she knows one of the reasons that Christian is like unable to actually have a real relationship with her is because he's still completely hung up in Magnolia. Magnolia Parks, at a table with her sister. She's completely wretched, everything about her. The way she brings her coffee up to her mouth, the way she tucks her hair behind her ears, even how she blinks. Her movements are willowy and somehow innately likable and captivating. God, imagine having that as a sister. The sister's beautiful too, I'm not saying that she's not, but there's something about Magnolia Parks, I guess. Something you think really only belongs in the movies, but it's real in her. Like she's the real life version of Helen of Troy or something. I think in one hand, she like doesn't like the level of like pretense that Magnolia puts up, but also like primarily she doesn't like Magnolia because of Magnolia's relationship with Christian. And she does know kind of more than Christian thinks she does about Christian and Magnolia's relationship, because one time she was able to get like Henry drunk, and essentially Henry spilled the whole beans on how like Christian and Magnolia dated for a while right after PJ and them broke up. And she has this feeling that, and she's not entirely wrong, that one of the only reasons that Christian like takes her out and like even took her out this morning for breakfast is to show her off, to like try to make Magnolia jealous. And she also knows that like whatever happened between like Christian and Magnolia, it also like it's something that as a friend group they pretend it doesn't happen, but she's like, it's so clearly like sitting in the middle of the room between them. She says, here's what I've worked out. Something happened between Magnolia and Christian, and whatever it was, however it went down, it made everything for the group of boys strange and shitty. I also know that it's something that they all ignore now. Pretend like it never happened. Except it fucking did happen. And now it's just a thing that happened that they don't acknowledge but move around like a corpse in a room. It lays there decaying, stinking up the whole place, and all they've done is throw a blanket over it and pretend there's no whole ass elephant rotting away in their middle of their friendship group. And so she also, like, again, we get, like, I feel like the clearest picture of a lot of things from Daisy, and this idea that, like, to some extent, like, Magnolia and Christian being together did something irreparable to the friendship group. And they all ignore it and pretend like it doesn't exist, but, like, it is clearly, like, festering in the middle of things. It is going to implode at some point. Then we get a chapter from Christian's perspective that is mostly like introspection, and we learn a little bit more about his past, his relationship with the Valentines, and also his relationship with Magnolia. And we get a little bit more about the Jemez sister drowning, and we get kind of his perspective on it and how it really like rattled the whole family and like really changed his dynamic with his parents and particularly his dad. We'll unpack more about his dad later, but like it completely changed his dad. It changed his relationship with his brothers and connected him to the Valentines in this way that is unbreakable. And he thinks about the fact that he's low-key like becoming a little bit obsessed with Daisy. Like he really, really does like Daisy, but he's still so hung up on Magnolia. And then he tells the story of like how Magnolia and Christian wound up together. So after the BJ Magnolia breakup, the friendship group kind of like splintered. And so in order to hang out with Magnolia, they kind of had to do it in secret because he was like on team BJ. Essentially, he got roped into BJ's group. And so in order to spend time with Magnolia, he had to do it independently. And so one of these hangouts, it was just him and Magnolia, and they got caught in the rain and they like ducked into this phone box and they were just like super close and they wound up kissing. And they keep it secret from like all of the boys. They like keep it super secret. And even at the time, Christian knows that essentially Magnolia is just using him to prevent herself from drowning. She is like drowning in this grief after losing BJ, and she is using Christian as a life preserver. And he knows that, but he is allowing her to use it. Popping that kiss on the timeline, the phone box kiss will come up a lot. Anyway, we in the present day are in a full box set dinner. So everyone is out to dinner at this place called 7 Park Place. And the Tennessee Waltz comes on. And this was apparently Christian and Magnolia's song. And they immediately clock it and they just like glance at each other. But BJ also clocks this look. And he says like, why are you looking at each other like this? And he like blows up and he storms over to the bar. And then we get Magnolia's perspective on this relationship. And she thinks back to this relationship as something that like really did save her. She said is the only thing that like made her feel human again after losing BJ. And she also knew there was a part of her that also was just with Christian because she knew it was going to hurt BJ. And again, there is a sense, particularly in these early years and months, but even now to some extent, where Magnolia is almost like constantly like punishing BJ for what he did, for this like cheating incident that happened. And Christian seems to be kind of another element in that. It only lasted a few months in total. It was like 1 month between when they kissed in the phone box and when BJ found out and like beat the crap out of Christian in that club. But they continued for a few months after that, like keeping everything super secret, so no one knew. And eventually it just like fizzled out. Like it didn't work. Anyway, so in the present day, after BJ storms off, Magnolia's trying to like lighten the situation. She doesn't want to like ruin the dinner with this like look and BJ's overreaction to it. And so she turns to Christian and she says to him, "What are you doing later?" Like as a joke. She's just joking around. She's just joshing. And Christian gets really upset about this. He like feels like Magnolia just like messes around with him when BJ is out of the room, which is to some extent true. Like he's not wrong. But he like blows up. He says like, "Fuck you." And he walks out and he storms out of the diner This is like a literal Michelin star restaurant. And he storms out and Magnolia is like shocked. She was not expecting this like anger, like this overblown to her understanding of things, anger reaction. But Christian is just like so frustrated that he still has these feelings for Magnolia, and Magnolia won't reciprocate them, but also won't like completely let him go. Like the moment BJ isn't around, she is like kind of clinging back onto him again. And it makes him feel like he's trapped in this cycle. Is he trapped? No, you have agency. Get out of there, Christian. You're the boss of yourself. So he goes home and then he texts Daisy on his way home and he's trying to see if Daisy will come over and hang out with him. But Daisy is with a friend. And we know that friend is Romeo. We love Romeo. Romeo is my second favorite after Tiller. If I'm going to be a Christian hater, that means I have to also enjoy Romeo. And then you know what? Romeo grows on me every time I read this book. Every time I read this book, I'm like, you know what? Romeo's a pretty solid option. Anyway, back at the restaurant, Magnolia is just watching BJ at the bar, like do his thing. And she like knows how it goes. Like she knows his moves. He uses the same moves every time. He says to the girl, he goes, "Are they real?" Like looking her right in the eyeballs, and the girl will be like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And he says, "Your eyes." And Magnolia's like, "Doesn't matter if they are the most boring brown eyes you've ever seen in your entire life. He uses it every single time and it works." And it like makes the girls like, oh, like throws them off a little bit. And then he says, "Oh my gosh, did you have braces?" And then the girls will look at his mouth. It's just like a cue for them to look at his mouth. And Magnolia's like, "Once you look at BJ Valentine's mouth, It's over for you. As soon as you look at his mouth, he has a good mouth. It's over. He's taking you home. And so he's like going through the motions with some girl at a bar, and Magnolia is just like watching him. But then Magnolia, instead of just like watching him self-destruct as he likes to do, she goes over to the bar and she's like talking with them and being like, BJ, come with me. And BJ's like, no. And then she looks at BJ and she says, who would you rather go home with, this girl or me? And BJ is like, okay. And he goes home with Magnolia. And it's just like a softer conclusion to this night. This night, instead of like escalating, Magnolia was able to de-escalate it and bring it back to a place where like BJ is not just like imploding and she's not imploding. And it like feels a little bit like progress. Will it remain progressing forward? No, of course not. We still have many books to go. Meanwhile, at the same time, Julian is spending the evening on his boat. He has a little boat, and he just likes to hang out on it. And who should show up but Tills? Again, Tills just follows them around. Tiller shows up on the boat, and he's like, hey. And Julian has been, like, just, like, floating around on the boat, thinking about whether he should steal this Klimt or not, because it seems kind of like a bad idea, but also kind of seems like it would be fun. And Tiller shows up, and Tiller's like, hey, Julian, how are you? Did you kidnap a girl last night? And Julian is, like, offended. This is kind of a rude thing to suggest, honestly. Like, he doesn't do kidnapping. Okay, he's a criminal, but not that kind of criminal. It's offensive that you would say that. And Tiller is like, well, I mean, you are a criminal, so forgive me if I thought you would be open to other avenues of crime. And we learn that when Daisy was 10 years old, she gave Julian 3 rules. No human trafficking, no, like, no crimes of that variety, and no kids. They don't do anything that involves kids, and that would involve kidnapping as well. And Tiller is like, cool, thank you so much for telling me. Which, again, Tiller doesn't seem great at his job. He seems to, like, really belong to the school of, like, the swiper, no swiping school of criminology, which is that criminals have to tell you the truth. And if you ask them about something or you tell them not to do something, they can't do it. I don't think that's how it works, but I love that for him. And as soon as he leaves, Julian gets on his phone and he texts a mystery number. We get a lot of text messages in this book at the end of most chapters. In both of these books, we get text messages. But this text message is going to a mystery number. We don't know who it is. And he's just like, hey, are you okay? And the person on the other end is like, yeah, I'm fine. What's the deal? And he's like, I was just checking to see if you'd been kidnapped or not. And the girlie's like, it's a girl. Okay, it's a girl. Spoiler. The girl is like, no. And Julian's like, cool. If you ever need anything or anything weird starts happening, you know you can call me. And the girl is like, okay. Like a weird interaction. It's like nice. It's not like super awkward. It's a little flirty. But like also, who's he talking to? A few days later, Christian is chilling at one of Jonah's clubs. He hasn't talked to Daisy in a few days. Things are kind of like weird between the two of them. A little tense. And then Romeo Brambillo strolls in and Christian's like, oh my gosh, hi, I haven't seen you. You've been gone in New York for a year. Like, so great to see you. Who are you here with? And Romeo's like, oh, I'm here with Daisy. And Christian's like, oh my gosh, I forgot you two had a thing. He's obviously immediately getting defensive. He is annoyed and jealous that Daisy's here with another guy. Because obviously he is, but he cannot show it or let it. And he would know that he's jealous. And Rome is like, bullshit that you didn't remember that Daisy and I were together. And Christian is like, yeah, I literally just thought of you guys as children and just like completely ignored you until recently. And Romeo's like, okay, what happened recently? And he's like, oh, I like figured out that Daisy was 20 and I started sleeping with her. He doesn't say sleeping with her, but I cannot say what he says about Daisy Haites at this point because it is too objectified and it makes me feel yucky. So I shan't. And things get very tense between them. And Christian is like worried/excited. He's like, I would punch Romeo if like I was given the opportunity. Like if someone was like, okay, go ahead and punch Romeo, I would do it right now. And we learned that Christian doesn't fight anymore because he's too good at it. Because one time he was fighting and he killed a man. That's right, Christian has murdered someone on accident. This is dropped way too casually into the conversation. But anyway, he doesn't fight anymore. He doesn't wind up punching Romeo, but later he does pull Daisy into an office in the back, and Daisy is like, hey, what's the deal with the bartender? Like, I heard you fired him, that bartender I was talking to last time I was here. Christian's like, he's bad at his job. And Daisy's like, it seems like you were jealous. And I thought we didn't do jealous. We don't do jealous. But like, what's the deal with you and Romeo? Not that I'm jealous, just like in general. He's like, kind of seems like the worst. And he starts kind of like talking down a little bit on Romeo. And Daisy's like, no, we don't do that. Like, he's important to me. He's like saved me multiple times. Things kind of escalate from there. They wind up getting into like a big fight over Romeo and over the jealousy thing, and like neither one of them wanting to like come out and be like, I don't think we should see other people anymore. I think we should only see each other. And it ends with Daisy being like, fuck you, and just like storming out of the place and leaving, which good on her. I wish she never came back. The next morning, Christian still hasn't called her, still hasn't texted her, like, still things aren't looking good. And Romeo comes over and she's like thinking about Romeo as like a potential, she's like, should we include him in the love triangle? Should we invite him into our love triangle? Me, Christian, Romeo, Till should get invited too. It's a love square. A love pyramid? A pyramid scheme of love. The great tragedy of Romeo and I is that once upon a time we did work, and I'm educated enough to know that there are a million reasons that could explain away the connection we have. Similar upbringing, shared trauma, circumstance, proximity, all of those things can be true, and none of them matter anyway because Romeo is frozen in my brain as a 17-year-old boy with the sun setting behind him on Formentera. His shoulders are pink, his hair's all a mess, there's sand on the bridge of his nose, and I'm standing on his feet the way little kids dance with their dads. That's who he is to me. He's also the boy in the bathroom who, knife against his throat, who mouthed to me that he was sorry. And he cried while someone else tried to kill me. I don't know whether we work now, if we can, whether we should even try, but I do know that there are a few safer feelings in existence than his head on top of mine. He's the sexiest security blanket alive, to me at least. And so we get a little bit more about their relationship and how Romeo makes her feel safe, and that they've been put in multiple situations in which Romeo and her's lives have been in danger together, and how that has kind of bonded them together. We don't get much time to dwell on that because who should knock on the door but Tiller? Obviously, Tiller's always coming over. He should honestly move in at this point. I don't even know why. Like, I feel like we'd never get into any crime related questions. Maybe he asked if like Julian is over. But he does bring up that he doesn't have a girlfriend anymore. He just like drops that casually into the conversation because that might be information that Daisy needs to know. And Daisy's thinking to herself, she's not sure if she's into Tiller or if she's into the idea of being normal. Like, but there is something about him that is like fascinating. So anyway, we might be inviting both Tiller and Romeo into the love triangle. They flirt for a while, then Tiller goes home because I don't think he was there for crime reasons. He was just there for flirting reasons, which, okay, go off. Honestly, better than Christian, who was just there for Magnolia reasons, to be honest. And Romeo was like, oh my gosh, what was the deal with that? And Daisy's like, oh my gosh, that's just like kind of our relationship. We like flirt all the time. No big deal. It's very benign. And Romeo is like, I don't think it's benign. Romeo says to her, you underestimate how good at flirting you are. Like, this is a date. Like, you are doing more than you think you're doing, Miss Daisy. And Daisy's like, okay, whatever. Then we get a Christian chapter, and an interesting Christian chapter because it takes place at the Park Lane house, so at Jonah and BJ's house. I honestly am a little unclear at who lives at Park Lane. Like, I thought it was Jonah and Christian and Henry and BJ. Like, I thought it was all four of them, but I don't think it is. I think it might just be Jonah and BJ's house, maybe Henry's house. Where does Christian live? I don't know. I'm confused by their living arrangements. They never sleep at their house for very long, so I'm a little perplexed by it. They're over at the house, and Jonah and Julian and Henry are all playing video games together, like in the living room. They're like hanging out because remember, Jonah and Julian are like best friends. It's always weird when we see Julian pop up in like a space that feels like more of a Magnolia Parks type space. I'm like, what are you doing here? Christian starts talking to Julian and asking him about Romeo and Daisy. He's like trying to get a little bit more information about their relationship. And Julian's like, well, what has Daisy said about it? Like, have you asked Daisy about her relationship with Romeo? And Christian's like, yeah, all she said was that Romeo saved her. And Julian says, yeah, he saved her a couple times. And he goes on to list 2 times that Romeo saved Daisy. The first time was someone tried to kidnap her from school. Romeo took care of that. And the second time was someone tried to kill her out of the amusement park. And Christian's like, I mean, that's only 2 times. He only saved her life twice. And Julian's like, there was another time too. And we're all like, okay. And he goes, anyway, are you into my sister? Like, are you in love with my sister? And Christian says, nope, just using her for sex. And for some reason that I don't understand, Julian doesn't pick him up and throw him out the window. Julian's just like, okay. Like, kill him on the spot. Miguel would have. I feel like, honestly, this is a little out of character for Julian. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess they're just, like, having boy conversations, but I didn't like it, Julian. Stand up for your sister. I just did add a few more updates to the timeline. One, I like put on here that Christian murdered a guy. We don't actually know exactly when this happened, but I just like popped it on the timeline because I do feel like it's a crucial event in their past is murder, as you might. And I also put the Daisy Haites attempted kidnapping and the amusement park incident and the Haites parents' death because we are about to find out more about that next chapter. So we've got a few more events happening in the Haites timeline. This chapter is a chapter entirely told in flashback as Julian recounts the experience of his parents dying. So, like I said, I've mentioned before, Julian's and Daisy's parents died when Daisy was 8 and Julian was 18. They were on the way home from one of Julian's rugby matches. Julian was like like planned to go professional with rugby. He was very good at rugby. And they were leaving one of his matches and they decided to pull over and stop at the beach. There's like walking, all four of them, mom, dad, Daisy, Julian, walking on the beach when this man comes up to them. And this man has a gun and he points it at Daisy and the Haites mom. And the dad jumps in front of Daisy and gets shot. He's still able to kind of like get himself together enough to like tackle the guy, like not enough to like overpower him, but just to create enough of a distraction for Julian to grab Daisy. He like physically grabs her, picks her up, and they hide behind these boulders and then listen as this man shoots both of their parents. And then Julian turns to Daisy and he is like, are you okay? Like, are you fine? Daisy is like, okay. And he says, I am not going to let anything happen to you. And Julian, recounting this in the present, adds on to this, I'll never let anything happen to her. Not a day in my life. This is the moment where like Julian's relationship with Daisy fundamentally changed and shifted from like brother to like protector. And Julian knows the guy is going to come for them. He's like, he knows that we're back here. He's going to come for us. And so Julian gets ready, and as the guy comes around these rocks that they're hiding behind, Julian jumps out and literally beats this man to death with a rock in sand. Okay, go off. And then they head back towards their parents. Their parents are literally both like dying on the beach. Like they're bleeding out in front of them. And Julian goes to his mom first. And his mom like refuses to even look at Daisy. His mom is the actual worst. Oh my gosh. We will learn more about the Haites mom, but she's terrible. And she refuses with her dying breath to tell her daughter that she loves her. And so Julian just like leaves her there. And he's like, maybe I should have been a little nicer to her since she was dying, but like, she was being so mean to Daisy. For why? You're literally dying here and you're going to use your dying breaths to be mean to your daughter. Okay. Anyway, so he leaves her to die alone, and then he goes over to his dad, who's also literally seconds away from dying. Their dad has like final words for both of them that like both like fundamentally shift and like become like the central motivation for them as they move forward through their lives. And he says to Julian first, it's all yours now. She's all yours now. Like the responsibility just like completely shifting at like the entire like family empire of crime it shifts to Julian, but also Daisy. Like both of these are like the two most important things in Julian's life. And then he turns to Daisy and he says, you are your brother's keeper. And this is like a fundamental thing that Daisy believes as well. This like, Julian is like physically make sure she is safe, Daisy feels this obligation to keep Julian like sane. And Julian like goes on and talks about how Daisy remembers there being 8 shots, but he's never told her that actually they found 15 bullet holes in her father when they like, did the autopsy of him. 15 bullet holes in her father, that he had 2 guns. He was shooting him with 2 guns at the same time. Like essentially it was overkill. It was just like make a point. And Julian has like sworn from that day forward, like no one will ever use his family, his people to make a point again. Okay, Julian, I'm sure that will literally never happen. The next day, BJ and Magnolia are giving major couple vibes. They left like all soft and like people are like, oh my gosh, that seemed like different. And Magnolia was like, oh my gosh, I do think it was different. Like, I think maybe we've matured. Maybe we're getting back together. Maybe this will be great. And BJ is kind of feeling the same way. They like have a sleepover together and they separate. And then that night, BJ calls her, texts her, calls her and is like, hey, do you want to come out to the club with me and the boys tonight? We're going out tonight. Magnolia's like, no, I don't want to. I'm too tired. And BJ is immediately suspicious. He's like, what the heck is going on? Because he knows Magnolia isn't tired because they slept together. They didn't sleep together. They slept in the same bed. They slept in the same bed, and he knows that she slept like a baby because he slept like a baby. Like they had a really good night's sleep together. Like they both slept really well. She was like feeling really rested and recovered in the morning. She couldn't be tired now. Then we get BJ's perspective. So pause for a second. We'll go back to Raffles. But we get BJ's perspective on the moment that like changed his life, the moment he met Magnolia. He was 5 and Magnolia was 4, and Magnolia was over at the house to see Henry, and he wound up BJ was in the backyard kicking a ball, and Magnolia wound up wandering out there, and Magnolia said to BJ, you're a bit good. And BJ was like, thanks. And Magnolia says, I would probably be better if I wanted to be. And BJ, he's like, I have sisters. I know not to say no. And so instead he's like, yeah, you probably could be if you wanted to. And they like chat for a little bit. They like introduce themselves to each other. And then Magnolia says, I like your face, which Do children say that? I don't think I've ever heard a child say that, but like children also say like literally cuckoo bananas things every day. So I believe a child would say that. And this is BJ's remembering of that. Parks doesn't remember saying that, but I remember her saying it. It set me on a course for life. I was high as a kite for the rest of the day, probably chasing that feeling ever since. And sometimes I wish I could go back in time and tell little me to fucking run. That this girl is going to ruin you. She'll be all that you think of all the time. She's going to bake biscuits and grind your heart up and use it for sprinkles. She'll hurt you and you'll hurt her and you'll never, ever fucking get past her. But I can't. And even if I could, what parts would I change? The parts where I had her? Never. And so like this, from the moment BJ was 5 years old, he's been a little bit fixated on Magnolia. And this is like their origin stories for BJ. So Magnolia didn't like start falling in love with BJ until she was like 14, but BJ has been in love with Magnolia since he was like 5. Precious. Anyway, so he's in a bad mood because he knows that Magnolia lied about why she doesn't want to go out tonight, and he like really thought things were going to be different, things were going to be better. And so what does BJ do when he gets upset? That's right, he sleeps with someone. And so he has a girl literally grinding on him in the club, essentially just like giving him a lap dance in the middle of the club, when who should walk in but Miss Magnolia Parks. But before we can get into Magnolia's reaction, we get a Magnolia chapter in which we finally get the full story of what happened the night that BJ and Magnolia ended. So essentially we find out that Magnolia was homesick. It was like a Saturday night. She was homesick and BJ went to a party. Like pretty standard, nothing strange. She didn't want to go out. He didn't want to go out. No big deal. They're in a very healthy relationship at this point. But all of a sudden BJ shows back up at her house and he's in this like manic, disheveled state, like frantic. And he's like, I slept with someone else. And Magnolia's like now, like right now. And he's like, yes, like literally happened, ran over here. And Magnolia is so upset. She like throws a vase at him. She's like crying. She's like screaming. Having a meltdown, and she runs to the bathroom and she locks herself in the bathroom, and she can hear BJ is just on the other side of the door and he is like sobbing. She's crying, he's crying, and he starts to have like a panic attack. Like he's not breathing. He's like truly freaking out. And so she comes out of the bathroom and she like sits with him and she helps him breathe, and she like calms him down until he's breathing regularly again. And she then like looks him in the eyeballs. I think she like physically holds his face and she says, we are done. Like we are over. And she gets up and she goes and locks herself in Marcelly's room, where she spends the next 36 hours, she says, just like sobbing over the end of this relationship. Again, we don't know who he cheated with. We just know that there was this incident at this party which he slept with someone else, and it broke them. It fundamentally just like severed them. A pretty like clean break there. Anyway, back to the present day when we are in Raffles, Magnolia's version. So Magnolia, we go back a little bit and we know that Magnolia said no initially to BJ because she wanted some time to kind of like process what had happened the night before, because it did feel different. It felt softer. It felt like they were coming back to each other, and she just wanted to like sort out her feelings independently. But then she changed her mind because she said, you know what would actually make me feel better is if I had BJ. Like I want to actually just like talk this through with BJ rather than like sit by myself and try to process these feelings alone. So she gets dressed in this cutie little pink outfit and she heads to the club, and the first thing she sees is this girl grinding on BJ, and it's just like kind of this confirmation of all of her fears. Like she can't trust him. Like she's been away from him for like less than 12 hours, and like already we have like a girl on him again. Like just like her worst fears coming to light. And BJ jumps up as soon as he sees Magnolia. He jumps up and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, you didn't want to come out tonight. And I like thought that we were over. And she's like, you're disgusting. You disgust me. And she doesn't leave. She like storms back to the couch, and BJ is like, fine, whatever. He's super hurt. And also remember, as soon as he sees Magnolia getting upset, he like does the worst choice. He says, what is the worst choice I could make right now? And he's going to do that. That's what he's going to do. And so he sits back down and he lets the girl continue to grind on him. So they're sitting on the same club. Magnolia can see BJ. BJ can see Magnolia. And they're having just a terrible time. When who should sit down next to Magnolia but Mr. Tom England. Tom England sits down next to Magnolia. We know Tom England as this very handsome, very like the most eligible bachelor in all of London, right? He's like very wealthy. He's a pilot. Again, they just have like hobby jobs, and so he like is a pilot, but he's a billionaire with a B, and like it's just like charming. And Magnolia's had a crush on him since childhood. They like sit next to each other, and Tom's like, hey, I saw all that happen. Can I buy you a drink? And Magnolia's like, you can in fact buy me several drinks, Mr. Tom England. Like, I'm having the worst night ever. And Tom is like, he buys her a drink, and then he winds up, they like chat for a little bit, and then he winds up kissing her, and she's like, what was that for? And he says, the boys are going to tell BJ. The boys are going to tell BJ that I just kissed you. Would you like to go somewhere else, like somewhere a little bit quieter? I like know of a place that's like 10 minutes from here. And she's like, perfect. And so they get up and they leave. Her and Tom England leave together, but like very much Henry and Jonah saw, and maybe Christian is Christian there? I'm not sure. They saw Magnolia and Tom England kiss, and for sure BJ is going to get the information passed along to them. We love it. And so her and Tom go to like a quieter little bar, and they're sitting there and they're having a really nice chat, and Magnolia's talking about how she had this huge crush on him when they were kids, and Tom's like, I've actually like had my eye on you for a couple of years, like you are like pretty cute, like I think, you know, this can maybe work. And he's like, the thing is, like, I'm not in a place really where I want to be in a relationship right now. And Magnolia's like, yeah, sort of same. And he said, but I think I would make a really good foxhole. Like, we could be like really good covers for each other. His brother, so we learned that Sam England, his older brother, has like recently died. And so he's just like kind of grieving that loss. And so that's just left him a little like shaken. And so he's like not ready to date. And so he's like, I think we could be each other's foxholes. Like, we could fake date, and you could use me to like make BJ a little jealous, and I could use you to just like kind of be like this safety net post Sam's death, and like have someone to like bring with me to like family events and things. And she's like, this could actually work. This could work super well. And so they decide that that's what they're gonna do. And so that's where we're going to leave it, because I have been filming for 17 years at this point. We're about a fourth of the way through both of these books, so I assume there'll be several more videos over the end of these. A lot happens in these books, okay? And I don't want to, like, do you want me to not tell you about the purse that BJ, the Chanel purse that BJ got Magnolia? That would be an injustice to you and I, to be honest. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see it when the next Magnolia Parks video comes out, make sure you subscribe so it shows up in your subscription box. And also, let me know if you enjoyed this video. I hope you have an excellent day. Bye.